This is Chattanooga Civics. I'm Nathan Bird. The City of Chattanooga regularly works with nonprofit organizations to consult and provide services on projects that are outside the city's usual scope. One such nonprofit is the Trust for Public Lands, or TPL, a conservation group which seeks to bring the benefits of parks and nature to the places, people, and communities that need them most.
I'm Noel Durant. I'm the Tennessee Institutional Giving Manager for the Trust for Public Land. That's a mouthful, but I'm the fundraiser for the Tennessee office of the Trust for Public Land.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on the show. I was just hoping to open up. Just tell me very generally about the Trust for Public Land. I know a little bit about it. I've seen it around, but just for all of our listeners, give a broad overview.
Yeah, so the Trust for Public Land is a national conservation organization. We've been around since 1972. And our mission is to create parks and protect land for people, ensuring healthy and livable communities for generations to come. So the way we do that is we partner with public land managers to acquire properties, plan parks, develop parks and trails, convey those to the public to be owned by the people in perpetuity.
Cool. So how does that kind of work in terms of handing the land over? Does it continue to be managed by the Trust for Public Lands, and that's kind of the mechanism, or it actually gets brought back into some kind of public entity?
It is always owned by the public entity. So We are a facilitator. We are a transactional specialist when it comes to real estate transactions. Mm-hmm. We'll do the deal with a partner that will own it and steward that long term. So in comparison to a land trust, that holds real property rights forever in the form of a conservation easement or lands that are owned outright. We're a facilitator. And so we always have to have a partner. So we're kind of baked in to be a collaborative entity from the very beginning. Okay,
great. And so in this case, in this particular podcast talking about the City of Chattanooga, you'd be facilitating these deals for the city. And I'm sure you've probably done work with the county. And, I was looking at your website, you do work all over the country.
That's correct. Yep. So the Tennessee office was started in 1994 when the city and some of our leading institutional foundations were looking for a national partner for greenways planning, specifically the South Chickamauga Creek Greenway. And so we responded to that request for proposal, and we were selected. And so we started working on a Greenways master plan. And we've been sort of the keeper of a vision for a more connected Chattanooga since 1994.
That's awesome. So does that include the official Tennessee Riverwalk as well as all of these side connector trails? Or because I know that gets really hairy with the city and the county, and there's a lot of different stakeholders there.
We can't claim the Tennessee River Park. It's been that has been a vision for this community for going on 50 years. Mm-hmm. But we've played a very significant role in the creation of the River Park system, whereby we are out there working with landowners, acquiring the public access that's necessary to build that trail corridor. So we were there alongside the county, alongside the city, alongside River City Company to think about, okay, we've got a line on a map. How do we take that line on a map and bring it to life?
Really?
And that requires building relationships. And so that's what the Trust for Public Land as a specialist in, early on, really were a real estate focused entity. Mm-hmm. Let's do these transactions to make this trail possible, to make these parks. That's where we were working from national parks to neighborhood parks. Mm-hmm. So we've in the Chattanooga area, we've worked with the National Park Service. We've worked with the state parks. We've worked with Hamilton County, worked with the city. So that sort of breadth of work and the idea that we're not in this alone. We always have to have a public partner has lent itself to some really rewarding opportunities over the years. I'd say, starting with the South Chickamauga Creek Greenway, as we were acquiring those easements along that route from Camp Jordan, where it starts right on the state line, all the way to the Tennessee River, to the river park, we were able to build relationships with landowners, build relationships with community members and other partners, as we look at opening that this calendar year. We're going on 27 years of creating the South Chickamauga Creek Greenway. We have a really robust infrastructure and an interesting community tie to that space. And that's really where the Trust for Public Land in its current focus is working. We have a strategic commitment to putting community at the center while addressing health, equity, and climate through our work. So that gives a little more context to when we think about our projects in Chattanooga, when we think about our projects across the state and across the country. What's motivating us is that people are at the center of our work. We work alongside communities. And these three commitments are really important to create strong, resilient communities that are healthy. And so that's a little snapshot of the Trust for Public Land, local context to some of our history here, and a little bit about how we are different from a land trust, which are vital. They're incredibly important for healthy natural communities and healthy human communities as well. But we're a different type of organization.
Right. So you're not holding the land like a land trust would. You're facilitating these transactions and making sure the land gets used properly. How much work does TPL do on kind of the design side of these projects? So something like the South Chick Greenway being, the land being acquired through TPL, obviously, but in terms of the design and, picking the finishes, and, there's a little park along the South Chick Greenway at a certain point that is really cool. How much of that work is done through TPL and how much is done through partners? Yeah.
So we have the capability of taking a project from a line on a map to a completed turnkey park. And South Chick Greenway is a great example of that. Various segments of that project have been sort of led by various entities, mainly the City of Chattanooga and the Trust for Public Land. And so if you look at going from the Tennessee River Park and heading downstream or south, the first stretch that ties into the Tennessee River Park was acquired by the Trust for Public Land, designed and constructed as a project owned by the Trust for Public Land. We were essentially the general contractor to make that work happen. And that was an important link and a really important part of our public-private partnership with the City of Chattanooga. That was a really challenging section to build, and it was a catalyst to move forward with completing the whole corridor. At that point, in 2013, when we really started that project, 2012, 2013, there was the Camp Jordan and Brainerd Levee section, and then there was a gap of 3 miles to the next piece at Sturkey Farm, and then there was a mile gap to the Tennessee River Park. So it was in segments. There wasn't sort of this continuous experience. And so that completing that segment sort of led as a catalyst to say, all right, we have 3 miles left to go. Let's figure out how we get there in partnership with the City of Chattanooga.
And so does it vary from project to project who is kind of leading the charge on a given project? Like who decided that there needs to be a connection from Camp Jordan to the Tennessee River Park? And then when does TPL come in? And is that the same every time, or does it differ?
Yeah, so that goes back to the original vision of the South Chickamauga Creek Greenway. Was we have this amazing natural resource, the South Chickamauga Creek, that when it flows into Tennessee and East Ridge, there's this public space. Wouldn't it be amazing if we followed along the creek to where it ties into the Tennessee River? And so at that point, they had the idea, okay, what would a trail look like along this route? And at that point, that's when they said, all right, we need a partner to help facilitate community engagement around this idea, bring in a design team who's got the capability to lay this out as a plan, and then we need a partner that can implement it, acquire the public access, acquire the easements and the properties, and we need to start thinking about how we build it. So we are often brought in when there is, there's the vision, right? Or when there's an opportunity. And historically, when you're talking about real estate, a lot of times when something comes up for sale, people are like, what can we do? How can we make this happen? So we were for a long time a very responsive organization, where a great example of that would be Stringer's Ridge. When the plan came out that the 96 acres on Stringer's Ridge were under contract to be turned into 400 condominiums, the top 40 feet of the hill chopped off, the community rallied and said, oh my gosh, we have to protect this open space. It's within a mile of the Tennessee River. It's in the heart of our city. Like, how do we protect it? And the Trust for Public Land said, all right, we'll step up. And at that point, the organization made a significant commitment on behalf of this community to go out on a limb and actually assume the contract when it fell through for the developer, and then raise the money to pay ourselves back after we purchased it, and then turned it into a park. So that's a great example of a responsive acquisition, responsive park creation project, where there's definitely a vision of what Stringer's Ridge could be, but at the time it was kind of nothing. It was like the no man's land of open space. But the idea of losing that catalyzed the community, and we were the ones able to respond. And again, in partnership. That's a city park. It's encumbered by a conservation easement held by a land trust. So it really is the idea of the collaborative nature of public lands is really baked into how we approach a project. And I say that responsive as something of a historic context, because we are also very focused on being strategic. And we look at the Trust for Public Land nationally. One of our key goals is we are focused on creating parks that are close to home, that are within a 10-minute walk of home specifically. So that's roughly a half mile. And what that means is if you have a park within a 10-minute walk, you can incorporate that into your daily life. Right. And that's really important for urban residents. And we're also thinking critically around what's a measure of park access and public land access in a more rural setting. But the 10-minute walk is really how we're thinking about our work in context to urban areas like the City of Chattanooga. And so that sort of forms a basis for strategic thinking. Where are parks needed most? And then when you start layering on our other commitments for health and equity and climate, you can start seeing the stacked benefits of where a park can benefit a neighborhood that's has a high percentage of impervious cover, meaning a lot of concrete and not a lot of trees, where there are significant challenges to public health outcomes, and where there is a lack of public investment or a lack of economic vitality in a neighborhood, and overlaying those and think of how a park can be a part of, it's not the solution, but a part of a solution to make a community more whole.
So I want to backtrack just a little bit. You're talking about how on the South Trick Greenway, you were kind of brought in by the stakeholders to say, hey, we need somebody to manage this. And then it sounds like Stringer's Ridge, you played a more responsive role where you saw an opportunity and TPL jumped on that opportunity. And I'm guessing the city was brought into that kind of at a later point rather than the city leading the charge. Am I understanding that correctly?
It was sort of at the same time when this opportunity. So because of our very close working relationship with the City of Chattanooga, and I was not on the team at the time, but the nature of our relationship was that we were able to say, hey, we've got an opportunity very early on. Before we signed a contract, we assumed the contract, we talked with the City of Chattanooga, and they said, yes, we would be a partner in this. And at that point, now we know we can move forward. So it's, although we're being responsive, it has to happen where we know there's a partner on the other end to make it go from a public ownership perspective.
Right.
And we've had a strong working relationship with the City of Chattanooga since 1994, and are frequently speaking with administrators across departments, that whether it be within parks, public works, engineering, economic and community development, to think about how parks fit there. And we are, in terms of the story of specifically greenway and trail development in the urban context, we are right there, sort of wet at the hip with the City of Chattanooga.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked a lot about the South Chick Greenway, the greenway that runs from Camp Jordan to the Tennessee River Park on Amnicole Highway. What other projects do y'all have kind of going on right now, or that have been wrapped up recently that, maybe our listeners might not know about yet?
Yeah. So I'll mention in sort of order of timeliness of completion. So we are currently working on a connection from Stringer's Ridge into the city of Red Bank to White Oak Park, which has been a long-term vision since the idea of Stringer's Ridge came about,
mm-hmm.
In the late 2000s. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could connect to this at that time, it was a new city park in Red Bank. And so we, again, took a line on a map, went to the landowners, acquired the real property interest for public access, worked with the various land managers along the route, including Tennessee Valley Authority, City of Red Bank, to come up with a plan. And then we designed it alongside, working with a local engineering firm to come up with what the corridor could be. And we're in process right now of contracting the work to finish that trail connection from White Oak Park into Stringer's Ridge, creating one of the first real neighborhood access points that's broadly accessible within the city of Red Bank to Stringer's Ridge. So that's sort of next on the completion date. And then as we look a little further down the line, we are working on a connection to the Tennessee River Park to Alden Park. So tying in, using an old rail corridor that we acquired from CSX Rail Lines, using that corridor as a greenway, following roughly 33rd Street to Southside Community Park, which is in sort of downtown Alton Park. And then from there, how can we envision a South Chattanooga pathway connection to Eastlake Park?
Mm-hmm.
And how does this sort of reconfigure walkable, bikeable access across the southern portion of the city, which is really divided. If you look at going from the Tennessee River and working your way east from there, there's significant heavy rail lines that are separating Alton Park from the rest of the city, meaning there's very few surface street connections because of those rail corridors. And then you've got the Chattanooga Creek corridor, mm-hmm. and the wetlands and the environmental legacy that is Chattanooga Creek, that sort of created that. Those are both significant barriers to connectivity across the southern half of our city.
Right.
And we are right now working again in partnership with the City of Chattanooga on completing the design of the Alton Park connector, which is 1.3 miles from the Tennessee River Park to Southside Community Park. And then thinking about the next step from Southside Community Park to Crabtree Farms, which is, you could measure it in yards in terms of the distance, but if you were to have to walk or bike there, it's miles.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking about advancing that towards design and public acquisition of that corridor. And then again, that's in partnership with the City of Chattanooga. And then from there, thinking about what sort of surface street improvements could be made, sidewalks and bike lanes from Crabtree Farms to Eastlake Park.
Right. No, that's fantastic. I mean, that whole area can be really difficult to navigate if you're not driving. I live over in San Elmo, and I'm trying to ride my bike as much as I can, but crossing Chattanooga Creek, crossing all of the rail lines, crossing the interstate at that point, all of that provides a lot of barriers. And then, that's kind of north to south, and then east to west, you have all the industrial land, all the rail lines. It gets really difficult. Yeah. So it's great to hear that there's something coming down the line on that.
Yeah, it's a really exciting opportunity. And I think one element that is really important for this is what we call the South Chattanooga program, is that, again, being a collaborative organization from the beginning, especially when we're talking about a neighborhood, say like Alden Park, that has seen its more than fair share of challenges over the years in terms of the legacy of environmental injustices to that community and their economic isolation from the rest of the city. Mm-hmm. We had to start at the community level. And the team that I get to support as a fundraiser have done an amazing job of not coming in and doing the typical, well, what do you want to see in your park? Really understanding how do you think about parks? How do you think about your neighborhood, your community? And coming out of that, we've built some really wonderful relationships working alongside the residents of Alden Park to understand their history, understand what they view as their priorities moving forward, and how the work of the Trust for Public Land intersects with that and supports their vision of what their community, their vision for their community. And I brought you a copy of the history we commissioned, written by a lifelong resident of Alden Park, around the neighborhood, how it started, where it is now, and how the Greenway mm-hmm. fits into their vision of a future. And this is really critical when we think about moving beyond the sort of the visionary responsive into this strategic place. We have to also be very strategic in how we work alongside communities, especially if equity is driving our work. Because if we are not thinking of people at the very beginning, we're going to find ourselves in a place where what we're doing might not be in the best interest of the residents.
Right. You don't want to come into a community and say, this is what you need, this is what you're getting.
Absolutely. That's the last thing that we want to do, because again, as an organization, that we don't own the projects that we're helping bring to life. The community owns them. Mm-hmm. And that if we were to say, here's what you're getting, they don't own that. They don't belong to it. And the resulting project might not have much of a life to it in comparison to working alongside a community, understanding their needs, wants, dreams, vision for a future, helping facilitate that vision come to life. And then they're the stewards mm-hmm. of their park. They belong to it. They're the ones that will be advocating for resources to care for it, advocating for continued advancement of public spaces in their neighborhoods. That's really sort of at the heart of how we're thinking about public space and parks and trails.
So how does all this get paid for is a question that you seem uniquely suited to answer. I'm assuming there's a lot of fundraising that goes into it, but are there grants and things like that as well?
There's a significant amount of fundraising that goes into it, and the philanthropic community in Chattanooga has been very generous in supporting public spaces, supporting trails, supporting parks. And we also have an interesting funding model where there are often public sources of funds that can be leveraged using private dollars. So when we talk about private dollars raised to public dollars utilized, we're typically able to leverage $8 of public funding for every $1 of private funding we bring to a project. That's nationally. And when we think of projects like the South Chickamauga Creek Greenway, we're probably more in the 1 to 4, 1 to 5 range, just because of some of the complexities there, where the private dollars, you're able to be more creative, more efficient with private philanthropy to bring a project to fruition. For example, we're currently building a stretch, a little over 1 mile stretch, actually just under a mile stretch behind the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum, tying into the Cromwell Hills Apartments, and tying into Lightfoot Mill Road and Youngstown Road corridor. That stretch was so complicated in terms of the engineering and the design criteria that we retained ownership of that portion. Instead of saying, hey, city, you manage this, we retained that ownership to have maximum flexibility with how we procured the work how we designed it, still meeting ADA requirements, but it just, when you've got private philanthropy, you can be a little more efficient and more nimble. And so that's sort of thinking about the funding mechanisms there. We typically utilize private funding for areas that are, of very critical importance, that have a lot of moving parts, and we're also able to leverage that over the course of a project. I mean, we very rarely do you have a project that's 100% privately funded. That's not very durable either, because you don't have the buy-in of the public entity. So we typically want to be working in that ideally that 1 to 8 range. And that's actually one of the roles that the Trust for Public Land is facilitating right now with the City of Chattanooga. We have a funding source that the city isn't currently eligible for through land water conservation funding. You may have heard of some of the legislation that was passed last year that permanently authorized land water conservation funding at $800 million a year. We need to get the City of Chattanooga back in compliance to make that funding available for parks investment. So that's what we're helping the City of Chattanooga do right now. And there are other smaller municipalities in the area. It's so easy to find yourself out of compliance from that if you don't have a master plan, if you're not meeting the state plan for outdoor recreation planning. If you had a park that had received money from the LWCF 40 years ago, you didn't know about it, and you turned it into something else. So there's all sorts of ways that you can fall out of compliance there.
Right.
But that's a really important source of public funding for parks on a national level that we're focusing on as a lever within the Chattanooga market.
So I don't want to get too into the weeds on that, but that sounds like there's a lot there. Could you dive into that a little bit more in terms of why is Chattanooga not in compliance? What does compliance look like?
Yeah, I could talk just briefly, broad overview. So there's the City of Chattanooga. This was many years ago. Had a property that was conveyed, and that property utilized land water conservation funds when it was originally acquired or built. So if you had the land and you built something on it for a park, that means you have to keep it that way. And at the time, the records of that park having LWCF funding, they weren't there, and it's a really arduous process to go through to get back into compliance. So we are assisting the City of Chattanooga to find a replacement parcel that will facilitate getting back into compliance there. And in that process, it's been really interesting to be sort of helping shepherd along a project process that is really complicated. You've got to work with the state. You've got to work with the National Park Service, who are the administrators of those grant funds. So it's a place that a lot of municipalities find themselves in, and it's really important for organizations like the Trust for Public Land to be a proactive partner. And I mean, we're here to be solution oriented. And this is a really impactful source of funds that we are excited to be utilizing to build new facilities for this community in the future.
I'm wondering if you speak more broadly about what your relationship is to the City of Chattanooga in particular, in terms of how that has developed over time, how it changes, how it's affected by new administrations. How does the kind of civic landscape of Chattanooga affect TPL's work on a year-to-year basis, or is it fairly stable since you all came in the 90s?
Well, our relationship with the City of Chattanooga, I mean, it's formalized. If you've seen council agenda sessions, we have a contract with the City of Chattanooga to be a partner in thinking about parks. So we operate with the City of Chattanooga on a scope that we collaboratively look at for that course of the next year. So when they're working on the budget cycle, when we're looking at the scope of work, like, okay, what are the priorities that we are going to be advancing in this next year? And work collaboratively with the park planning team to make sure that those things are what we both want to do. They're aligned, they're feasible to be completed, or not completed, just measure of progress. Because with public interest projects, they often span multiple fiscal years.
Right.
And so that's the nature of our work. And I think one of the wonderful things about being a long-standing partner is we have a significant amount of evidence of our partnership and the impact of that partnership. So when we are working with a new administration, it's really amazing that we can go to a long-standing project like South Chickamauga Creek and say, here's from 1994 to where we are now, and then a new project, say like the Alton Park Connector, and like here's the future of connected communities in Chattanooga. That's really motivating to know that from both our perspective, to know that we can be a really strong partner for a new administration, and they're coming in. They're not having to start from ground zero around these planning elements. Like we've been a part of it. We know how the city has operated for the last 27 years. So that's a little bit of the nature of how we get to work alongside administrations, how we work alongside our city partners, and again with the city of Chattanooga and thinking strategically. Well, it's been very interesting to think about geographic investment within parks and within trails. And as we think about the 10-minute walk, there's some really interesting elements. If we look at the sort of the top 10 sites for how we could advance the 10-minute walk in the city of Chattanooga, they're very geographically diverse. And they're not all in the urban core of the city. There's a significant, we're probably hovering under 40% of the city of Chattanooga having access to a park within a 10-minute walk. But some of those pockets of where we can maximize access aren't in one council district, which is really great.
Right.
We get to work across many districts, and again, being community driven. The council districts are where a lot of folks are engaging with the civic process in their neighborhoods. So it's exciting to be thinking about the geographic opportunities presented by parks across the city.
And then what are just some ways that citizens can get involved with Trust for Public Lands? Are there opportunities to volunteer for, physical work of building trails, or is it more public engagement, or, even just making your opinion heard on, there's a project coming down the pike and I want to, I need this kind of connection. We talked about, with Alton Park Connector, needing that public buy-in. So what is that process like for citizens to get involved?
Yeah. So as an organization, we're very small in terms of our staff. We have somewhat limited immediate hands-on volunteer opportunities. Most of those are through our partnerships. So for example, the upcoming Public Lands Day, National Public Lands Day, towards the end of this month, there's going to be a facilitated volunteer event up at Stringer's Ridge. And that's done in partnership with the City of Chattanooga, with the Southern Off-Road Bike Association, with the Friends of Stringer's Ridge. And again, we're a partner in that, but our role is really as a facilitator. So we don't have a ton of hands-on opportunities, but that's a really great opportunity for folks to come out and get involved and give back to public spaces that they know and love, like Stringer's Ridge. Another great example would be the South Chickamauga Creek Greenway Alliance, their work along South Chickamauga Creek doing tree plantings, riparian restoration work. That's another opportunity to get out and volunteer on projects. And then there are opportunities for folks to speak up when we're talking about neighborhood access. We try to focus our engagements really intentionally with the neighbors that are right there in the in that vicinity. But we do need folks to speak up on behalf of what they want to see in parks. So those are some of the most immediate near-term opportunities that I can think of, or sort of types of ways to get involved with the Trust for Public Land. I mean, I'd say in our work, so many times we are sort of looking at a level that doesn't provide as much hands-on, tangible opportunities for folks to see how we are doing the work. And that's a challenge as an organization. Folks know of Stringer's Ridge. They know of South Chickamauga Creek Greenway, but they don't know of the Trust for Public Land and our role in that. But through our partners, there are some opportunities for folks to get to know, and they probably already know these spots, but know them on a deeper level.
Right.
You get to work out there, and that's how I've come to know and love a lot of these places. Is just spending time, on South Chickamauga Creek, the cultural heritage, the natural habitat that's present there is really unparalleled within the city of Chattanooga. It's I can geek out on that all day, but I've only come to know that because I spend time out there, and that's what motivates, I think, many folks within the organization is the opportunities that public lands provide for someone to know a place, know their community more deeply, and what does that mean for the future of that community when you have citizens who are invested and know about what makes that place special, what makes that place tick. And that I think is really vital for the future of a community like Chattanooga.
Great. Where can our listeners find out more about the Trust for Public Lands?
Yeah. So the best way to find out about us is on our website. It's fairly easy. It's tpl.org. And we have a Tennessee-specific site. So if you click around on the website and look for our work, where we work, you can click on Tennessee and get a sense of the work we're doing here. Another great way to get involved is to come out at the end of the month on September 30th to Chattanooga Design Studios Civic Speaker Series. Rhonda Chapman, our National Director of Equity, will be hosting a roundtable around public spaces through the lens of equity, through the lens of history, through the lens of authentic community. So hope folks can join.
Great. Well, Noah Durant, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for telling us about the Trust for Public Lands.
Thank you, Nathan.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Chattanooga Civics. Our music was written and recorded by Kevin MacLeod. If you have any questions or feedback, please send me an email at chattanoogacivics@gmail.com. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram @chatcivics, or visit the website chattanoogacivics.com. Thanks for listening.